the spring of 1955, Providence wished that the drama should heighten itself. The old chief of all pagans, the planet Jupiter, was destined to enter the scene and speak. It was a spring day in early April at Princeton. This is the time of year when magnolia flower and the Princeton campus has not a few of these trees, especially near the Firestone Library, profusely blooming. During the first week of April of that year, the semi-meeting of the American Astronomical Society convened for 3 days in Princeton. In the university's chemical building, Frick Laboratories, I entered the auditorium during the reading of one of the papers, when the audience was already seated and chose a place on one of the back benches, close to the entrance. I did not wish to disturb the convention by my presence because, being recognized, I would have caused some discomfort. After listening to W. Bod and possibly one more speaker, I left as quietly as I entered. I did not return for the other papers. The program of the 3-day convention had 102 papers presented by astronomers from all over the country, but only one not scheduled, yet read because of the great impact it carried in the field of planetary astronomy, made news. The next day, April 6th, opening the New York Times, I found a page-length column on a sensational discovery reported at the meeting. The column read in parts, "Radio waves from the giant planet Jupiter have been detected by astronomers at the Carnegie Institution in Washington. The waves appear to be short bursts of static, much like those produced by thunderstorms on conventional radio receivers. No radio sounds from planets in our solar system have been reported previously." Oh, that's incorrect. Tesla reported getting them in the early 1900s. The existence of the mysterious Jovian waves was disclosed by Dr. Bernard F. Burke and Dr. Kenneth L. Franklin in a report today at a meeting of the American Astronomical Society. The two scientists said that they did not have an explanation for the observed emission. Princeton, New Jersey, April 6th. The discovery was made entirely by chance. When the Carnegie Institution astronomers scanned the sky for radio noises from faraway galaxies, in the news release it was told that Burke and Franklin, who detected the radio noises of Jupiter, were entirely unprepared to observe any radio signal from the planet. Later, their perplexity was more fully described. At one point, they even assumed that some revelers returning from a party were the cause, trying to start the engine of their car. I mean, you can tell they were so uncomfortable by the discovery that they weren't sure they even wanted to be the discoverers because they were afraid of getting blackballed. They had to go through the hierarchy. Or that the radio noises were caused by some experiments on a neighboring radio station. But the noises were finally traced to Jupiter. In the weeks that followed, Burke and Franklin observed that the signals were arriving 4 minutes earlier each day, and at length they realized they must be of extraterrestrial origin. Every third night, for 6 minutes, when the receiving antenna was directed toward the spot crossed at these minutes by Jupiter, the signals repeated themselves. Then the astronomers of Washington came to the correct conclusion, unexpected and surprising as it was. For me, this news had special significance. My own earlier expectation of the noises of Jupiter was based on my view of the giant planet as the center of a powerful electromagnetic system. In ancient sources, the planet Jupiter was associated with thunderbolts. Before World War II, a discovery was made by Jansky of the Bell Laboratories that radio signals arrived from the Milky Way. During the war, it was discovered by the U.S. Army Signal Corps in Belmar, New Jersey, that the sun sends out radio noises too. It was a chance discovery made in the process of testing radar echoes from the moon. The radio noises were found arriving from faraway galaxies and were explained as crashes between galaxies riding through one another. A new science, radio astronomy, was born. My understanding of the nature of the sun and planets made me assume that these bodies are charged, or that at least their atmospheres are strongly ionized. Of Jupiter and Saturn, It is known that they influence, in some mysterious manner, the solar spot activity, but nobody thought that these bodies or their atmospheres are charged. Now, seeing my claims confirmed, I called Helen Dukas and told her that I would like to acquaint Professor Einstein with the discovery of the noises coming from Jupiter, and wished to see him for a few minutes only. We agreed that I should come Friday, April 8th, in the afternoon. Then I called my editor at Doubleday, Walter Bradbury, and told him that I would come the next day in the morning. Already on the phone, I drew his attention to the column in the Times. My book, Earth and Upheaval, was being prepared for print, together with my lecture before the Forum of October 14, 1953, as a supplement, and this lecture contained my challenge that Jupiter would radiate radio signals. For several years I wished that a check should be made on Jupiter, and took this opportunity to suggest it to scientists. In my letter to Einstein, June 16, 1954, I again suggested that an investigation be performed. It was a challenge on my part to Einstein to stake the debate on this my claim, and at the same time a plea to help me that the test should be performed. Einstein did not respond in that instance. In a note made on the margin of my letter, he wrote, "This would be no criterion. This was not well thought through." Right, because he didn't have it. Either there must be on Jupiter a dissociation of negative and positive charges that would produce thunderstorms of unearthly magnitudes, or more likely the entire body of Jupiter is charged, surrounded by an electromagnetic field, and attracts opposite charges from space, yet by continuous subatomic processes of fission in the great discharges, or by some other process, keeps its general charge undiminished. The Forum lecture, a discussion of my thesis of 1950 in the light of new discoveries in the fields of archaeology, geology, astronomy, brought in its wake, even sooner than I dared to hope, a confirmation of a bold yet well-founded advanced claim. The discovery of Jupiter noises thrilled me, as had no other confirmation before, and it was the first of a long, spectacular series. Emmanuel Velkost.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. The parent star of planet Earth holds a strange and special place in countless ancient traditions around the world. The celestial body identified as the sun in myth, religion, ancient astronomies, and rock art routinely bears no resemblance at all to our familiar sun. One of the most common ancient depictions of the sun is an orb or star within a crescent, an image with no modern natural referent. And numerous traditions depict the sun as a spectacular celestial wheel, with a warrior hero appearing as the axle of the wheel. For decades, comparative mythologist Eb Cochrane, as well as his colleague David Talbot, have worked to reconstruct the natural events that produce these extraordinary mythical patterns. It is their conclusion that in the relatively recent past, in the era of prehistory, a period of instability reigned in the inner solar system, bringing planets within close proximity to Earth. In this episode, Ev begins our investigation into the question, did ancient man observe a different sun?
It is important to underscore the radical nature of our hypothesis. We hold that the solar system has only recently been subject to wholesale reordering, that in fact, well within the memory of mankind, a different sun prevailed. Our hypothesis is fundamentally a work of historical reconstruction based upon our mutual researches in comparative mythology and ancient religion. The research of Dave and myself is distinguished from other comparative mythologists in that we draw upon and emphasize the message of prehistoric rock art to illustrate our findings from literary traditions. To take but one example from hundreds that might be offered, ancient paintings and petroglyphs of the sun depict a wheel-like object, commonly 4 or 8-spoked in structure. Such artworks are global in nature. Yet how is this fact to be explained? From the conventional standpoint, such artworks are interpreted as abstract or metaphorical in nature. Miranda Green, for example, in her otherwise interesting book, The Sun Gods of Ancient Europe, concludes, "The pictures do not describe reality." We beg to differ. It is our view that the prehistoric paintings accurately reflect the appearance of the ancient sky and offer compelling testimony with regards to an unfolding catastrophic celestial event in which nearby planets dominated the northern circumpolar heavens. The mere fact that analogous sun petroglyphs will be found around the globe supports this conclusion. At the same time, ancient myth offers corroborating testimony in this regard, wherein a different sun dominated the sky in former times and presented a wheel-like appearance. In this sense, as in countless other examples, the testimony of ancient myth and prehistoric rock art agrees at a level of detail that is impossible to explain by mere coincidence. In the Thunderbolts of the Gods, together with a number of other recent publications, Dave and myself have presented a wealth of evidence that the former sun was the focus of prodigious electrical activity and the source of spectacular outbursts of lightning, heaven-spanning storms, and aurora-like phenomenon. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, the Sumerian word for sun is Ud. The same word is employed to write storm or thunder god, a startling extension of meaning. Sumerian hymns invoking the ancient sun god likewise describe it as a source of storms. So one hymn reads, "The sun god thunders over the mountains like a storm." Another hymn reads, "As my king, the sun god, comes forth, the heavens tremble before him and the earth shakes before him." Now I ask, does this sound like a realistic description of the modern experience of sunrise? In what sense is the sun's appearance over the eastern horizon ever accompanied by a shaking of heaven and earth or great bouts of lightning? What could the sun have to do with thunder and lightning? In the present solar system, of course, the answer is nothing at all. Yet the mere fact that other ancient languages preserve this very same semantic link between sun and lightning confirms the fundamental historical veracity of the Sumerian traditions and cries out for an explanation. Ancient Egypt, for example, offers corroborating testimony in this regard. In the pyramid text from the 3rd millennium BCE, the sun god's thunderbolt is specifically compared to the lightnings of the sun. The word in question here is mut, M-A-W-T, which has cognates denoting lightning in numerous other African languages. Significantly, however, the very same word is used to denote the spokes of a wheel. In the present world, of course, lightning has nothing whatsoever to do with the sun or wheels, hence the fundamental importance of such terminology for our historical reconstruction. But we need not rely simply on ancient language and myth alone. Mesopotamian cylinder seals, together with prehistoric rock art and other early artworks, likewise depict the sun with lightning-like structures emanating from its core. Students of comparative myth will recognize the structure adorning the face of the sun here as the thunderbolt wielded by the thunder god. So, for example, thunder gods like Zeus or the Semitic Adad are routinely depicted holding exactly this thunderbolt. Properly understood, the evidence from ancient language, like the testimony of prehistoric rock art, represents an enduring fossilized record of a different solar system, much as the discovery of a dinosaur bone harks back to its former age, one radically different from that which currently prevails. It must be remembered here that the denigration of myth is a relatively recent development, basically originating during the early decades of the 20th century. The science of comparative mythology, like the complementary science of comparative linguistics, grew out of the 19th century writings of world-class scholars such as Max Müller and Adalbert Kuhn, who rightly emphasized the prominent role of the sun and the thunder god in ancient myth and religion. Yet the excesses of these schools, together with that of the Pan-Babylonians, led to a general backlash against naturist or astronomical interpretations of myth and religion. Current models of myth, such as that advanced by George Dumézil, which dominates scholarship, emphasize linguistic connections above all else and are much more narrow-minded in scope. For example, Dumézil largely focuses on Indo-European myth. Most important, perhaps, is the fact that current models of myth always seek to understand the ancient traditions by reference to the present sky. But the ancient testimony is impossible to square with the present solar system. And as a result, scholars are left with empty slogans pointing to figurative language, metaphor, and such statements as that of Green, quoted earlier, to the effect that the pictures do not describe reality. As Dave and I have documented, however, granted the fact that the ancient traditions and prehistoric rock art complement each other, it therefore stands to reason that they do indeed describe historical reality. Confronted by these sun wheels, for example, on ancient rock art, the default position of so many modern scholars is just to ascribe those artworks to imagination or abstract forms, completely overlooking the fact that the same exact design is found all over the world. So at that point, you need to ask yourself a question. Were ancient skywatchers on every continent on the earth imagining the same fantastic structure in the sky, which in this case is just a cross on the face of the sun or a lightning bolt on the face of the sun? But we could cite 1,000 other structures that we could describe if we wanted to. We're just trying to focus the discussion on these particular structures at the moment. But are we supposed to imagine that all these skywatchers all around the globe were imagining the same thing? That is not a logically sound position. It's much more rational to assume that the ancient skywatchers were trying to describe their personal reality. They drew the picture of the sun that they saw, and that's why those pictures agree all around the world. Things that are imagined are not going to agree unanimously around the world. It's just that simple.
Various plasma instabilities are found on Jupiter. NASA launched the Juno spacecraft on August 5, 2011. Its primary mission includes analysis of Jupiter's massive plasmasphere. How do its electromagnetic influences affect the Jovian system? Since Jupiter radiates more energy than it receives from the Sun, astronomers think that some kind of internal dynamo, acting like a generator, must be creating the excess. However, there are processes occurring on Jupiter that are now coming to light. Jupiter is an electrically active world, far more than computer simulations predicted. Based on what was surmised about Jupiter, a 5-Gauss magnetic field was assumed to exist. When Juno entered orbit and began its scientific measurements, levels as high as 9 Gauss were found. Compare those readings to Earth's 0.5 Gauss field, and the anomaly of Jupiter's electromagnetic energy can be deduced. Its field is so irregular, some astrophysicists to suggest that there is an anomalous structure in Jupiter's core. Recently, for example, Juno discovered jet streams on Jupiter that run further down into its atmosphere than previously thought, over 3,000 kilometers deep. Why the atmospheric bands are so deep is a mystery. since they have always been associated with superficial weather patterns. According to a recent press release, the south pole of Jupiter also exhibits an unusual grouping of phenomena. Under some simulated conditions, and on Saturn, cyclonic storms merge with one another instead of repelling each other. Multiple vortices encircle a central whirlpool of gas and dust. The structures are warmer than the surrounding cloud bands, but are still near absolute zero temperatures. Perhaps the Great Red Spot that has persisted for more than 300 years can provide additional clues to how the polar vortices are formed and stabilized. The consensus opinion is that it is a cyclonic storm driven by rising heat from below, because it is warmer than its surroundings. However, exactly how it was formed and why it has persisted for so long are mysteries. Wind speeds around its perimeter have been measured at 635 kilometers per hour, twice as fast as a terrestrial tornado. As previously written, Jupiter and its moon Io dissipate 2 trillion watts between them. That flow of electric charge causes lightning in Jupiter's upper atmosphere, along with auroras at the poles. Since Jupiter is obviously an electrical environment, it is there that some answers can be found. Rotating charging bodies produce dipolar electromagnetic fields, whether they are gas giants or rocky planets. Why some planets like Earth and Mercury possess magnetic fields, while Venus and Mars do not, demands further investigation. However, the basic physics of charged objects in motion generating electromagnetism is not debated. Plasma is not a substance. It is a state of matter. Any material can become a plasma if electrons are stripped from atomic nuclei, causing charge separation to occur. Whenever there are regions of opposite charge, and Juno team members detected a gravitational asymmetry inside Jupiter that most likely contributes to charge separation. Double layers will form, and an electric field will develop. An electric field, no matter how weak, accelerates charged particles. Depending on the characteristic of any given plasma, it will be affected differently by electricity. This could explain why the polar vortices are so distinct. Jupiter's electric field accelerates plasmas at different rates. Coupled with the cloud band observations, the massive cyclones exhibit distinct temperature bands, high wind speeds, and endurance. They appear to be more permanent fixtures. Charge separation in plasma could explain these anomalies. That's Stephen Smith.
Had a drastic effect on the system as a whole. The Saturnian planets were wrenched out of polar alignment as their respective spin rates accelerated in response to the Saturn system's displaced forward momentum. The multi-resonant state was suddenly broken, permanently upsetting the primeval state of our solar system. No longer axially synchronized, individual charge sheets formed around each planet as the conjoined plasmasphere of Jupiter and Saturn subdivided, electrically isolating them from one another. Saturn was displaced from its polar position, and the gaseous envelope surrounding the Saturnian planets began to disperse. As Velikovsky indicated, the increased distance between Earth and Saturn was most likely the result of both the removal of Earth from its place as well as Saturn from its place. The opening scenes of the divine spectacle would have been seen in the north skies, since Earth was still millions of miles below Saturn and Jupiter. But after Earth was released into a path of its own around the Sun, the plane of Earth's orbit would lift steadily, eventually reorienting at a steep inclination, crossing over the Sun's equatorial current sheet twice a year at each equinox. Thus, the eyewitness perspective on Jupiter and Saturn shifted at this time so that the unfolding drama panned from the northern skies to a side view of the sky gods receding away in the southern night sky. Derailed from their dynamically synchronized alignment, Jupiter and the large Saturnian planets immediately redirected their orbital momentums into elliptical outward-bound spirals. Nearly all myths of the fall tell of the disappearance of the gods into the deep night sky. A distinct parallel may also be drawn to the teachings on Zimzum, the first stage of creation described in the Kabbalah, the self-contraction, concealing, shrinkage, or retreat of the god's original form into a new dilation or opening of space. Steadily diminishing in size and luminosity, receding away from Earth in the inner solar system, hiding himself, withdrawing himself, entering into himself, the contraction of departing god Saturn cleared space for a new creation. The Kabbalah continues, that Zimzum, contraction, was completely uniform all around, so that it left a vacant space called Tehiru, an empty, hollow, uniformly circular on all sides. Until this time, our ancestors would have had no concept of limitless space extending away from the earth because such conditions had never before been seen. Unfurling like a curtain drawn open, the old heavens progressively whirled away from earth on all sides. The primordial cosmic waters of the old Saturnian gaseous envelope retreated and withdrew, differentiating a deep open space in place of the rainy wall of clouds that shrouded earth in former times. The age of Jupiter, now upon the world, introduced mankind to the light of the stars in the darkness of the night. In Egypt it was Jupiter as Re who boasted, I am he who made the hours, so that days might come into being. Nuit was specifically the nighttime star-studded sky arched over the wide horizon, through which the red sun-like disk of Re journeyed each night. In the Iliad, Night herself apportioned Zeus's sovereignty to the wide heaven among the cloudy aether, a wide band of night sky centered on the ecliptic, from approximately 17 degrees north to approximately 17 degrees south. The way of Anu, likewise assigned to Jupiter as Marduk in the Near East. As the battling sky gods retreated through this expanding space into deeper and more distant reaches of the solar system, they discharged as brilliantly lit wandering stars, still huge in size, though far removed, lighting the night as nearby suns. All four outer giants still exhibit rotational speeds far out of proportion to their sizes. All four still emit significantly more energy than they receive from the sun, and they are in that sense stars even today. At first looming large near Earth, Jupiter became the new central body of the sky, more or less taking over Saturn's old identity. When Jupiter was first born, he defeated Saturn and the Sun by his brilliance, we are told in Vedic literature. It was then that Zeus became Lord of the bright skies. A stellar history for Jupiter was, in fact, much in vogue among mainstream astronomers through the 17th to 19th centuries, when popular astronomy famously speculated on the nature of Jupiter as a dark star, a hypothesis revived during the second half of the 20th century in light of the considerable implications suggested by data recovered from orbiting satellites and interplanetary explorers. Jupiter's wide-ranging variety of active emanations, infrared, radio, X-ray, and ultraviolet among them, have led others to consider Jupiter as a failed sun or a star yet to be. Jupiter's volatile magnetosphere would continue to display dramatic plasma instabilities as it distributed an excess of voltage. Progressively acclimating to an outbound spiral orbit, Jupiter's appearance would have been stupendous in size, visibly larger than the daytime sun. Jupiter's massive magnetosphere, today 10 times stronger than that of any other planet and about 4 times as wide as the sun, would have fluoresced with brilliantly colored glow-mode plasma flows for some time thereafter, retaining enough of a mini-discharge to give a semblance of starhood. Below Jupiter's glowing globe appeared a long beard, mantle or cloak trailing all the way to the horizon below, a stupendous plume of plasma extending away from Jupiter's south geographic pole. This plasma expulsion would have been primarily an inflow of electrons, but simultaneously also an outflow of protons and other dissociated ions. Appearing as a steep, elongated cone, Jupiter's southern expulsion was also characterized as his royal mountain or throne of glory. In the Kabbalah, this appearance is remembered as the long-bearded Arik Anpin, the extended countenance of the newly crowned star god. He let out his throne above and stretched a part of his glory below. And the Ancient of Days did sit. His throne was fiery flame, and his wheels burning fire. For a cloak Marduk was wrapped in an armor of terror. With a fearsome halo his head was turbaned. On the other side of the world, Viracocha was similarly remembered as a tall, glowing, bearded man dressed in a long, flowing cloak, who came in a time of chaos to set the world to rights. The fluorescing debris appears to have assumed a highly flattened, disc-like or lenticular distribution over time, and still extends all the way to the orbit of Jupiter today. Sometimes referenced as zodiacal light, the ethereal fire waters of the dust cloud once extended some distance either side of the ecliptic plane, both obscuring as well as highlighting the fixed stars of the zodiac. Today the residual afterglow or countershine of the zodiacal cloud remains visible as a tall cone-shaped ribbon of soft light brightening on the plane of Earth's orbit before sunrise and after sunset. The interplanetary dust cloud as such represents the mortal remains of the primordial gaseous envelope dissipated during the collapse of the Saturnian configuration. Some of this debris may still remain suspended in the rings surrounding the giant planets. Earth would also wind up with its share of drifting dust and debris. Gas vapors, ionized meteoroids, and assorted celestial wreckage began falling through the magnetosphere with short-lived splendor. Heavier infalls of material through the ionosphere sparkled and fizzled out in the upper atmosphere as concentric circles and spirals aglow in the night. Migrating through the interplanetary cloud year-round, sweeping through the densest clouds of debris during each equinoctial pass through the solar current sheet, a near-Earth terrestrial dust cloud began to accumulate. Electrostatically suspended along Earth's equatorial plane, this dust cloud was sorted by the conductive sheaths of Earth's plasmasphere into rotating belts and rings. In the Zohar we read, "Then a great reservoir was formed out of the unfathomable deep, or Tehom, just as if a huge hollow had been dug. This reservoir divided itself into 7 streams, resembling 7 long vessels, glimmering with a metallic sheen. All of them are in the form of concentric circles, like the layers of an onion, with rings inside each other." Most traditional mythologies retained memories of these earth rings. A rich profusion of descriptions handed down from remote antiquity and conserved to this day in several schools of esoteric thought have puzzled scholars and laymen alike for centuries. During the day, these debris rings appeared to some as concentric streams, rivers, or seas. To others, as a looming golden-green hill stretching from horizon to horizon, covered with wind-blown grasses. Some saw fields of wheat or beds of bamboo.
And they act like it's sacrosanct, like it was handed down from Mount Sinai. Illusionary dogma that even if you question it, they try to blackball you. And what's up with all that? I mean, where are we headed with that? It's crazy. America, our First Amendment rights. But if you speak up and say anything, or even just delve into the evidence yourself, they try to make you think you're a bad person. Call you names like conspiracy theorists. Well, a conspiracy is nothing more than a plan that's made to be illegal. That's it. Conspiracies happen every day. That's nothing. It's just a word. It doesn't matter what it is. The Kennedy assassination. They got an official story that they try to cram down our throats. And if we don't like it, try to make us out like we're some kind of crackpot or crazy. I mean, that's not America. I don't know. One more thing that we haven't tackled, and that's the gravity issue. A while back, I did a video with Theodore Holden, and I don't know if you know it or not, but he was the guy who formulated it out a long time ago that dinosaurs could not lift themselves off the ground in today's gravity. And it caused quite a backlash, but then they just swept it under the rug like everything else. But
as it is to do one of those 1,000-pound squats or deadlifts at the normal weight of 350 or whatever. Okay.
yeah, that's a game changer. I mean, that should slap somebody in the face right there.
It did, right? And it's like, there was a huge controversy over that. Like 30 years ago, I was the only person on the planet saying anything like that. Nowadays, I think most people agree.
Mm-hmm.
They've done the math. It's like they've listened to the arguments, and I think most people agree with me that you couldn't have large dinosaurs walking around in today's world. The controversy now is like, do you or don't you want to believe in, in an expanding Earth theory of any sort? And the answer to my way of thinking is no. I have no use for Earth expanding theories, and
even with what they found out down there at that, the deepest place under South America, where the ground is actually coming up and expanding.
I hadn't heard about that. Give me a second.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Geez, what was that? I just saw it not that long ago. What's that one what's the place called where it's really deep down under South America? The Mariana Trench.
I don't really know.
Okay.
There's two reasons why anybody would ever talk about an Earth, expanding Earth theories, right? One would have to do with dinosaurs. The other would have to do with the tectonic plates of the ancient supercontinent, Pangaea.
Right. Okay.
The tectonic plates of Pangaea wouldn't fit on a planet. They appear as if they would require a planet of greater curvature, a smaller planet, right? But there's another way of explaining that, right? In other words, you've got the Earth sitting there underneath the dwarf star with its pole pointed straight out the dwarf star. It's going to get pulled into an egg shape, right? It's not going to be spherical the way it is now. Okay, it's like Pangaea was simply sitting there at the high point of the egg.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that would explain the greater curvature. Now, as far as dinosaurs go, like I say, you couldn't have it. It's like, if you put a sauropod dinosaur next to Bill Kazmar at equal sizes, then what you're seeing is one creature at the top of the food chain, the other pretty near the bottom, right? In other words, Kazmar's body is 90% bone and muscle, right? And that's trained as well as you ever could have muscle trained. And the brachiosaur's body is mostly gut and digestive system for processing leaves and grass, right? And I mean, if Kazmar couldn't make it 20,000 pounds in our present world, then a brachiosaur sure as hell couldn't.
Yeah, I heard they had 3 hearts in their neck just to pump the blood.
No, it's ridiculous. You've got two problems with dinosaurs and then with large dinosaurs, sauropods on their necks, right? And you've got two kinds of sauropod dinosaurs. You've got like brachiosaurids, which, according to the bones, apparently held their necks upwards, and then you've got the diplodocids, which would have held their necks outwards, or at least that's what the bones indicate, okay? Either way, you've got an insurmountable problem, right? It's like, in the case of the brachiosaurids, it's everything, in other words, the limiting value of something like that in our present world is the giraffe, right? Now, it takes a gigantic amount of blood pressure to get blood to a giraffe's brain, okay? And the giraffe has this very, very tight skin, which acts like a pressure suit, like for a fighter pilot.
Right.
And basically, I mean, a giraffe's blood pressure would blow our vascular system apart. Well, then he's trying to get blood to a brain which is 20 feet high. I mean, what is some sauropod going to do to try to get blood to a brain which is 60 feet high?
That is
experts claim that would put, the brachiosaurids in the position of just being constantly at risk for some kind of a circulatory system disaster, right? Now, that's no way to go through life, especially if you're trying to rule the world for 60 million years or something like,
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense. So they're claiming, well, it must be that like what the bones are telling us is wrong. They must have all just held their necks outwards, and the diplodocids apparently did hold their necks outwards. But in that case, you're dealing with a problem which is just as bad or worse, and I think is worse. You're talking about the center of gravity of that together with that much torque. You know, what you would really be talking, the one thing in the Earth which would be ballpark for that kind of torque would be like the combined maximum torque of all 4 of the engines of an Iowa-class battleship. There would be enough torque to drive a 65,000-ton warship through the water at 35 knots.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're going to hold that with some kind of a structure made out of flesh and blood?
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
No, that's... So there's no way for a large dinosaur to hold his neck in our present gravity, and that problem, if somebody ever really was able to do the math for it, which I have not been able to do, would almost certainly be a bigger problem than the question of gravity, you know, just being able to support weight, you know, on land. They used to think dinosaurs, you know, the large ones would have lived in water, but they had no adaptation for that. They would have needed snowshoe feet, right? In other words, the feet they actually have would just sink straight into muddy river bottoms. You know, they would take 3 steps to be immobilized.
So what happened?
Yeah, gravity changed, right? It's like you've got you know, like pictographs, right? Like, what's the word?
It was Velikovsky's claim that only a few thousand years ago, a period of chaos reigned in the solar system. One of the planets closely associated with Earth was Saturn, and watery filaments rained on our planet following Saturn's violent flare-up. Decades later, based on the respective research of Dave Talbot and Eduardo Cardona, Thornhill developed his own model of a primordially close relationship between Earth and Saturn, which was the source of all the water in our oceans, while leaving remnants in its rings. Today, Thornhill continues his presentation, shifting his focus to his own successful predictions for the Saturnian system, including the mysterious moon Titan.
Before I tell the epic story, a warning. Our education systems train students to memorize a litany of facts, which produces global groupthink. Students are not given the time or encouragement to critically examine the history of ideas. A leading researcher into the learning functions of the divided brain, Dr. Ian McGilchrist, has shown such blinkered left hemisphere training renders students functionally blind to alternative ways of looking at a problem. The left hemisphere simply blocks out everything that doesn't fit with its take. It doesn't see it, actually, at all. So scientists with their narrow specialized training may look at but cannot see what to a non-expert may seem obvious. They will be the last to see a paradigm shift in the making. This is particularly evident for electrical phenomena in space. Even the Nobel Prize winning founder of the idea of an electric universe, Hans Wolfgang, was ignored when he warned in his 1970 acceptance speech of an inevitable crisis in astrophysics if electric circuits in space are not recognized. Houston, we still have that problem after almost 50 years. I have lived since a teenager with uncertainty about accepted truths and learned to have the courage to challenge them. The result is not chaos, but a synthesis of ideas that explains the old ideas better and finds new ways of incorporating what seems a chaos of anomalies. And the best test is that of classical physics, simplification. The resulting paradigm shift is not a threat, but an invitation to the greatest adventure we may ever know, to begin to understand our real place in the universe for the first time. In our electric universe, stars and planets are formed at the same time inside molecular clouds, along a snaking cosmic lightning bolt. Gravity plays no role in the process. Since cosmic lightning takes the form of a twisted pair of current filaments, it is found that most stars are in pairs, or multiples. Planets will tend to do the same. Like the snaking filaments in a novelty plasma ball, the star-forming filament moves on, leaving a string of massive objects behind to gravitationally form the weird and theoretically challenging zoo of exoplanetary systems recently discovered. Some gas giant planets are subsequently formed in close orbits about a star that has ejected charged matter to achieve stability with a changed electrical environment. The ejection flares may account for the flickering of newborn stars, which can't be explained by gravitational accretion. This explains the unexpected hot Jupiter seen in large numbers closely orbiting other stars. The most numerous stars in the galaxy, brown dwarfs, which would appear reddish if they could be seen with the naked eye, are generally classed as failed stars, yet they have the baffling ability to produce massive stellar flares. This is simply explained because red stars don't have the ability of main-sequence bright stars to control their current by a transistor-like action in their photospheric plasma. A brown dwarf can only respond by discharging matter electrically. The capture process of a brown dwarf star involves flaring and ejection of charged matter by that body in order to achieve a new electrical equilibrium in its adopted family. That accounts for the large number of close-orbiting moons of our captured gas giants in remote orbits. With this in mind, I want to take you back to just before the famous Cassini-Huygens space probe was to arrive at Saturn on July 1st, 2004. In news reports, Saturn was dubbed the original Lord of the Rings. There is a profound truth behind such a glib turn of phrase, but it wasn't until the advent of the telescope that Christian Huygens in 1656 was able to suggest that Saturn had a ring. So how do we explain the Saturnian ring symbolism that pervades our cultures? The halo of the saints, the royal crown, and the ring given in marriage are Saturnian symbols, as are the circled or Celtic cross, the Egyptian Ansate cross or Ankh, the Eye of Ra, and the astronomically baffling star inside the crescent. The star at the top of the lighted Christmas tree is pure Saturnian imagery. It is truly amazing that we are still haunted by prehistoric archetypes. It helps us to understand the extraordinary archetypal attraction of Tolkien's fantasy of Lord of the Rings. He was well versed in mythology. The following description of events is based on the surprisingly detailed and truly remarkable scholarship of Talbot and Cardona, which required explanations with the physics of an electric universe. Let's call our primordial star Proto-Saturn. It was an independent brown dwarf with its own entourage of satellites, including the Earth, Mars, and Titan. Proto-Saturn's dim reddish light was due to a glowing red anode plasma sheath, much larger than the Sun, enclosing Proto-Saturn and its inner satellites in a radiant cell. The term dwarf star is purely theoretical, since they are difficult to see and measure. In fact, NASA reported a brown dwarf which was radiating as if it had twice the expected surface area. The environment inside the radiant red shell is most hospitable for life on any enclosed satellites because there are no seasons, and water is conspicuous in the spectra of such stars. Water misted down on this planet continually, and red light is ideal for photosynthesis, which explains the abundance of ferns and other vegetation globally in the Carboniferous era. But there is a catch. Brown dwarf stars are known to flare, sometimes to the extent, as one astronomer commented, that any satellites would suffer a very bad day. Such flaring by Proto-Saturn accounts for the geological strata and the fossil record of a number of global mass extinctions and instant burial of dismembered plant and animal remains. As we approached the Sun from deep space, our plasma sheath flickered like a faulty electric light when the two stellar plasma sheaths, or magnetospheres, began to clash. Proto-Saturn's galactic electrical power was usurped by the Sun, and its appearance changed dramatically. Before dimming forever, the dwarf star Proto-Saturn would have flared brilliantly like a comet, ejecting charged matter to relieve the electrical stresses caused by the sudden change in environment. Even now the former star has not completely cooled. Saturn still radiates more than twice the heat it receives from the Sun. And we have a simple explanation for the origin of Saturn's mysteriously short-lived water-ice rings. As the Proto-Saturnian system approached the Sun in the outer solar system, our minor star's gravitational sphere of influence steadily shrank, and its outer satellites were progressively stripped away. This, and the earlier capture of the other gas giants, provides the source of trans-Neptunian objects, as they're known, including Pluto with its unexpected geology and atmosphere, and its peculiar moons. There is a simple physical characteristic that links a captured star with its offspring. It is the axial tilts. Like our close-orbiting moon, satellites tend to orbit their primary with the same face always turned toward it. If they orbit in the equatorial plane, their spin axis will be aligned with that of the primary. As gyroscopes, the satellites will retain the same tilt even if jolted from their orbit, although the process may induce a wobble of the spin axis. It is therefore highly significant that the two key planets identified in the ancient pantheons, Saturn and Mars, have axial tilts closely similar to that of the Earth. The tilt of Saturn at 27 degrees to the ecliptic plane is itself an enigma, unless it formed independently from the Sun. Venus was described as a spectacular discharging body in the ancient congregation of planets. It can be explained if Venus was ejected in the flare-up of Proto-Saturn and the infall of the stream of ejected matter from swiftly rotating Proto-Saturn gave Venus a slow retrograde spin. The magnitude of the axial tilt of Venus to the ecliptic is much less than Saturn's, which suggests that Venus was ejected from a low latitude. This accounts for the hellish temperature and new surface of Venus, having been recently spat from the mantle of a brown dwarf star. Its filamentary equatorial scars caused by spectacular radial discharging, and its thick atmosphere inherited from the brown dwarf and subsequently modified by interplanetary and cometary discharges. Venus still has a cometary magneto-tail stretching to the Earth's orbit, and its mountain tops glow with plasma discharges, which return Magellan's radar signals as unexplained shininess. It has a surprisingly young surface that gave rise to ad hoc theories of resurfacing events. They're unnecessary. Venus is a baby. Since my predictions were written in 2004, the electrogravity model has been further developed, and it explains electrogravitational capture and the rounding of cometary orbits by electrical discharge. It explains the huge capture cross-section of stars and why the observed phenomenal discharging of cometary Venus caused it to finally have the most circular orbit of any planet.
The catastrophes described in ancient sources were traumatic experiences common to all mankind. Purged from conscious memory, these records are now interpreted as allegories, metaphors, and the trauma has been submerged in the unconscious. Velikovsky calls this collective amnesia. A revolutionary theory of the universe based on the records of the past has challenged the fundamental beliefs of modern science for more than 2 decades. Today, the unexpected findings of space explorations have confirmed many of the predictions of this theory, but the man who proposed it, Emanuel Velikovsky, is still rejected by established science.
Well, I've taken a lot, but they're not very good. You're in too close for most of them.
And if I transgressed and went into many fields of science and humanities, it was not because I was born a rebel. I was coerced to trespass. The belief that we are living in an orderly universe, that nothing happened to this Earth and the other planets since the beginning, that nothing will happen till the end, is a wishful thinking that fills the textbooks, and your textbooks are still of Victorian vintage. Is any physicist here who would stand up and defend the proposition that only gravitation and inertia are in action in the solar system. But of all my heresies, this was the greatest. And let me ask you another question. Is the theory of uniformitarianism, which means that nothing what happened in the past could have happened if it doesn't happen today. And this is built the modern geology, and this is built the modern astronomy, and this is built the modern biology and theory of evolution. And so, it is only wishful thinking that we are living in a safe, never perturbed solar system on a safe, never perturbed Earth.
Mountains were born and mountains collapsed. Land and sea changed places. Great streams of lava flowed. The sea boiled and evaporated. Such were the scenes of unimaginable violence during the times of global catastrophe.